Thank you. All right. Welcome back. And welcome to some chaplains who just came in. There's some panelists just came in. So there are new folks here. If it seems a little bigger, that's why. So some students from Swedish are here. So thank you for coming. And some of our panelists are here. I'm really excited about that. You're going to be really in for a treat for that. So we're going to continue another engagement. So for those who weren't here before, we focused a lot about trauma and what heals. Again, the key thing, trauma, overwhelming injury to the body and the mind, shatters inner schema. Healing, regardless of the modality, happens a lot through trauma integration and through your support systems. I'm going to give out the slides to Luke, and he'll pass it out another time if you want to look into that. But for now, for those of you here who were here earlier today, trauma is an overwhelming to the body and the mind. I'm repeating that. It is life-threatening. It psychologically and physically you feel endangered, and it drastically changes your view of the world. So keep that in mind. And then you bring in the component of race, culture, and class. So, 10 minutes. What is the relationship between race, culture, class, and trauma? And why is it important to consider these factors when addressing trauma and healing in your practice and in your churches? Okay. All right, everybody's gotten two tables that we haven't really heard from yet. The back table, what did you come up with?
You tell us now. Oh, me? I was trying to make the quiet one talk. We said that, talked a lot about aspects of race, culture, and class, and said that if you discount that, you've missed a huge part of the story. So first of all, and then we talked about aspects of that in various ways. So taking that into consideration in your healing practices and in the church, we didn't broach that completely, but just that to understand that person's story is hooked into race, culture, or class. We touched on the idea that class, you're going to get different services, the reality,
Yes.
different service levels because of your culture, and also maybe the stigmatization of perhaps first responders or whoever hears your story first may have, this is just how your race does this, therefore I'm going to discount you. So that sense of race and culture placing a stigma on you.
Absolutely.
So we went to.
Great, thank you. Table here.
Once I went to a meeting, Men Stopping Rape, years ago, and one of the persons I talked with had done research on prisoners, male prisoners, and on the average, two things he found out about them. They won't disclose that they've been molested until they're around 39 years old. And the other thing was that they can't read. Those two things are in common with many of the prisoners.
This is no news flash to all of you, but we're not spirits floating around in this room at this point, but we're embodied. What we look like, our gender, our race, our culture matters. And to think that it doesn't matter in our discussion of trauma really impedes the way you do recovery and is a huge disservice to your community if you don't acknowledge that. Okay? All right. So, certain racial and ethnic minority groups are vulnerable to trauma more than others. Latino, African American communities. A lot based on our history. I wish I could do a whole history class on all this kind of stuff, but it's true. And their empirical findings suggest that gender and racial differences in the vulnerability to traumatic events as well. Again, although there's 1 out of 3 women have experienced sexual violence, 1 out of 5 men. So it happens to both, but primarily to women because of their gender. The social determinants of violence among them residential segregation, I think Chris talked about that, racism and discrimination, educational disparities, high unemployment rates, poverty and overcrowding increase the propensity of crime and violence in American inner cities, as well again, trauma. Okay? So trauma is multi-layered. Again, we don't want it to completely pigeonhole any group here. It's not what we're trying to do. Actually, there's still more research that is being done to kind of figure it out. But what they are acknowledging is there's a difference how people understand their trauma, interpret their trauma, experience the trauma because of their race, culture, and their class and gender. That is true. And dearth of research. Again, most of the research is done on primarily white sample groups. And that's not generalizable among other population groups, and we have to understand that. PTSD affects all backgrounds, yet is understudied in many ethno-racial groups. Okay? Especially for Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, and Asian Americans. That group particularly has been understudied. And African Americans and Latinos, who often carry the greatest childhood exposure to adversities and traumas, are often underrepresented in these studies. And now there's also racialized trauma. That's a new thing people are researching. Like even being a person of color is traumatizing. And then you have these external traumas. And then you have these other things in communities. Do you see how that's compounded? Mm-hmm. Any thoughts about these? Or surprise? Any? Well, and then, I would assume that, I'm not going to assume, I've experienced the trauma that she experienced is re-experienced because of her color. Mm-hmm. Trying to get through the culture. So she struggles just because. And that affects, again, there's a lot of research around that, affects health-seeking behavior of certain groups. They won't go. Like, I'm a therapist. People are surprised when they meet me, when they open the door. Hi, I'm your therapist. You just see the discomfort or like confusion because I'm not usually the person that you'll see as a therapist. And we have to talk about that in therapy. You can't not say, oh no, I'm just colorless. It's real and it's affecting our dynamic.
I think I saw once on Channel 11 in Guam, and I'm not sure, don't have any veterans facilities. So one thing about research is you need a facility where you have people coming in to do research on. In North Chicago, they do a lot of work with PTSD. They have local healthcare center. But part of that would be, like they say, if there's no facility, you don't have the doctors there, the resources, little research.
Right. It's a good point because there's tension between that. Because of that, a lot of people of color and different various cultural groups have issues with research because of the Tuskegee syphilis research. So you can't forget that. History affects all of it. Like, why am I being researched? I remember what happened. And I can't go into that right now, but research if you don't know about the Tuskegee syphilis research, but it affects how people of color view and understand being studied by, potentially by white people. You'll come, okay, we'll come back to it, okay. I know that can start a whole nother conversation. It's important to know that there are differences in expression of mental health disorders and symptoms. Again, there's still growing research, and this is 2014. Asian Americans have the lowest change, or that's not the right word. They're least likely to be diagnosed with PTSD compared with white African Americans and Hispanics. Very interesting. And I think it's because, stereotypes about Asian Americans. Around not being not aggressive, all of that stuff that's been internalized in our culture. And also probably within that culture, not wanting to, again, share their own trauma because it brings shame to the family to share that. So all of that's involved. Will you say that to someone from, directly? But no. But you should be thinking about it. Like, I wonder what's going on here. That could be guiding how you ask questions and questions that you shouldn't ask.
I just wanted to clarify. Is that saying that they experience the trauma, but they just don't speak about it? They're not diagnosed, or they don't experience trauma at the same rate?
It's not diagnosed. It'll probably just diagnose something else, but not PTSD. Americans may be underdiagnosed PTSD, but more likely to report culturally sexist systems and coping styles, such as somatization and denial, and may refrain from discussing traumatic events and PTSD symptoms with clinicians. Again, these are something to just be mindful about because of just the various cultural stigma about talking about your own trauma and shame to the family. Studies with mixed-gendered community, law enforcement, and male military samples suggest that compared to white or Asian American adults, Latino and African American adults are more likely to have been exposed to violence. Latino adults also tend to report more severe post-traumatic symptoms than members of other ethnic racial groups. Not sure why, but so they're still figuring that out right now. But again, overwhelming injury to the mind, drastically change your view of world and God, changes your host trauma, affects your schemata, and you have all these issues. And most likely, people of ethnic minorities do not engage the system because they're afraid of it, because they're most likely not going to see people like them. And who wants to be judged if you don't really know about me or my culture or where I come from? It makes it very hard to share your personal story of trauma when someone doesn't even know really about your, just general basic history about your story. Sorry, the answer's not here. Hopefully you guys are connected to someone. But hopefully you start thinking about it. But okay, we'll engage it a little bit. Yeah. But it's a lot. It's heavy, and there's so But I think for most people, when I especially with working with my clients, and don't assume because if you're a white person with another white person, things are cool. Or if I'm a black person with another black, we're on it. There's other class issues. All of that affects how we engage. And when we put trauma in a particular bubble, saying that's all, you're going to focus on that and not look at the other factors, you're missing out on the story. And you're missing out on a powerful way of healing. It's always powerful when I talk to clients and we engage. I think it's interesting because I'm Black, Haitian American, people are more willing to discuss it with me. But I bring it in. And for example, some of you know the story, some of my students. So there was one woman, she's a white woman, and I think she was surprised when she saw me as a therapist. Elizabeth Pierre, and everyone else was not many people of color in the therapy group. And she looked visibly uncomfortable, and she kept talking about all her anti-racist work. And I was like, I know you're not coming to talk to me about anti-racism, but I'm going to go with it because there's something here. She was really anxious. I think she was anxious about her maybe feeling like surprised that she was anxious that I was a black person. So basically I said, listen, I'm okay that you're white. I don't have a problem with it. Do you have a problem with it? And that, we got to the deeper work because of that. So if you ignore it, you're doing a disservice because people feel it. So you need to address it head on if you're going to do the deeper work, especially as it relates to trauma. All right, so this is a very important one, especially around sexual violence. A lot of Caribbean culture, Latino culture, and Asian culture, the chastity of a woman is like the prize jewel, Like, if you're married a virgin, that's ultimate. It's the ultimate goal, And so that's difficult if someone's been raped or sexually abused. Because you don't want to, what did I do? And the shame around that. So it's very important to understand those aspects, how that can affect disclosure patterns for people. So the implications are women are responsible to remain pure. So if I'm supposed to be pure and this happened to me, date rape or whatever, then something must be wrong with me, and I'm not going to say anything because people will think I'm impure and therefore not marriageable. Shame for violating the roles. There's certain, roles. I know in my family as a Haitian American, this is what the man does, this is what the woman does, and if you break any of those roles, then things kind of go all topsy-turvy. That affects the disclosure. And again, less likely to disclose because Who wants to bring shame on their family, especially if it's a parent or a brother or a sister or anyone else in those particular cultures and traditions? So that exacerbates the effect of the trauma. Shame on the family, the cultural issues, and the trauma itself. Is that a hand turning? Any thought?
When one works outside of a Christian church setting, in a hospital or something else, the faith traditions inherent in the cultural traditions. I'm thinking of Islamic women,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, regardless of what color they are, if that's their faith journey and they've been brought up within that, the shame, you're not going to get a lot of exposure there, except in subtle ways and stuff.
Right.
So I think it's a really,
And therein lies the power of empathy when you're working with someone for that particular tradition. Things may not necessarily change, but everyone wants to feel understood. And that is transformative in itself. And oftentimes there isn't a place for people to feel understood. It may not necessarily change a thing per se, but at least it can be a place where, okay, she gets it, he gets it, where I'm coming from. All right, so this is a big one. In order to understand contemporary issues of black sexuality and their role in society, one must look at how the construction of black sexuality is shaped to the historical context of slavery, as this may influence how black women react to sexual victimization. This is including Native Americans, this is including Asian women, the sensualizing, exotifying Asian women particularly. All of that history, we can't all of it affects how we engage today. It's not in the past. I mean, look what's going on politically. It's all connected. So, I don't know if many of you heard Jezebel stereotype for black women. Has anyone ever heard of that particular stereotype? Who has? Jezebel stereotype. Okay, Anna?
my understanding is it's like Jezebel in the Bible, like to be this person, and if that's portrayed to you, right, it's definitely not what it is portrayed. It's kind of like outside or outside of marriage.
Okay, thank you. Chris, did you have your hand up? Okay. Well, historically during slavery, black women were either considered the mammy, the servants, basically doing everything for the household, the Jezebel, like the lascivious woman, she's licentious, she's always sexually available, or she's a strong black woman. That's basically how they're portrayed. That affects black women today, how people perceive them, and oftentimes how they perceive themselves, unfortunately, because it's so internalized. And how it affects black women, especially, there was doing some research that at one point, people thought, or I don't know who the people are, that black women were unrapeable because they're Jezebels. How can you rape a black woman who's sexual? And this also is for Asian women, the history of Asian women. Can you see how that affects how people treat and care for these particular individuals? The strong black image, basically, black woman does not grant African women permission to feel stress or pain, and that extreme permits a very narrow range of responses to adversity. Basically, like, I need to be strong for my family. All of these images, not necessarily, particularly the strong black women, they say it necessarily bad, but when you internalize it in such a way that you can't disclose or engage what's happening to you, it can actually kill you, literally. So implications again, black women are not rapeable, and there are studies about that, sadly, and disclosure patterns. So if you think I'm not rapeable, then why am I going to go to social service and get support? You're going to probably already stereotype me saying, okay, that didn't really happen, or you discount that person's story. This is particularly issues around for men too. Again, as churches, we need to talk about, again, even though rape and sexual violence affects primarily women, we need to start engaging how it deals with men and how they're socialized and how not being able to engage it, especially black men. Okay. So PTSD, again, symptoms rarely examined among black male homicide survivors because African American women are at increased risk for traumatic life events. Understanding culturally relevant factors that may influence active coping strategies is critical. Critical. Because of all these different layers, it affects how we all engage therapeutically and as ministers and as counselors. Any thoughts about this? Questions? research on your own, is that they're looking more and more into like post-slavery trauma. If you've never heard about, have you heard about? It's more and more people are engaging that. The history of lynchings and rapes does something to someone's psyche and actually to their DNA. And so, how is that affecting our contemporary culture right now? Forgetting her name, if I remember it, I'll put it on the slide another time. But she's doing a lot of research around that, and that trauma can be intergenerational. That so my class is doing the genograms. A very important part of our class is to see how certain traumas are passed on because they're not processed. Even secrets are passed down, and family members don't even know it. No one said a thing, but something is going on in the family that's been passed down. That's how powerful that is. Yes.
Okay, I just want to share, I read a book when I was working at the trauma center. It was called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome.
Yeah.
By Dr. Joy.
DeGruder, yes, her name. DeGruder, yeah.
It was a very good book in terms of, in the agency, we had different multicultural support groups.
Yeah.
So I was one of the facilitators for the African American support group. And bringing that in the session, understanding, you know, the history, the culture,
Yeah.
it brought meaning to the group.
Right.
And it also perpetuated the understanding and also healing.
Right.
So that is a very good book.
Yeah. Thank you.
Could you say the title one more time?
Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr.
It's like DeGrudery, something like that. If you Google it, you'll find it.
I have the book, maybe I'll bring it
Okay.
tomorrow.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Norma.
Just out of curiosity, okay? You mentioned in one of the slides about the fate of black women is sourced from slavery, and the image that they have today is inherited from that. I don't know how many years ago that was. And like I said, I'm just kind of thinking out of curiosity, if something so long-lived, you know, as a discourse, is still has a survival value today, I don't know what that survival value is. In other words, something persists because it's either something's holding it to persist, or society has a value, survival value for having it exist. And I don't have an answer. I'm just inquiring as to, you know, what could possibly be, and I'm really looking at personal responsibility, you know, or maybe even social responsibility, or community responsibility. Well, you know, what would, if I'm involved as an individual, and something keeps repeating from my past, how can I hold myself responsible for the existence of that?
That's a very large question in a very short amount of time.
Right. I know, it's like
Yeah, and there are many layers to that. I'm glad you're in the class, so we'll talk about it in class this week. We'll have more time to talk about that, but it's too much to just to engage at this point. But
And the most important thing is, you know, what am I getting out of it? That's the key.
it's complicated. Remember physiological changes too. Mhm. Thank you. So why does this matter as you provide care? I need a couple of people. Anyone just shout out. So what? So what? So what? We know a little about that. There's more, but so what?
Well, you can't assume that you get it.
Goodness sake, yes. Assumptions, assumptions, assumptions that we all have. Thank you.
I also can't always assume I'm the right person to help.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
We have to be willing to change.
All right. Very good. Oops, plug-in. All right, we're almost there. So that we're embodied, not one size fits all. And for some reason, we forget that. We think we're Gnostics, like this is, you know, a body and the flesh, separate them. But no, we're embodied for a reason. It matters that I'm a black woman. It matters that you're a white woman. It matters that I'm you're Filipino. Filipino. It matters. For us to deny that is to deny that God is creative and so bigger than ourselves and the beauty of it. And so it matters that we're in a diverse room. What did you expect? Did you expect me as a person of color to be here or not? Though you saw the picture, probably online. But it all matters because we all come in with our biases. And the most important, you got to own what your bias is. I don't care how clean and Christian you think you are, we all have them. You need to look at your heart and yourself, like, who am I afraid of? Who do I tend to gravitate to? Who I don't tend to gravitate to? Because that affects how you do your ministry and work. If you don't own it and understand, like, why do I engage with that person that way? Why did I assume that? For a lot of people of color, people whose language is not the first thing, you speak English very well. And for some of one of my Asian sisters, Korean, people talk to her like this, like she's deaf. We do these things because we're just not owning what we think and believe about other people. So take a good look at yourself and your heart, not to shame it, but to kind of acknowledge, because we all have it. To deny it is a big disservice to everyone. Just own it and say, God, help me, have mercy. How do I work and engage through this so I can be a better service to you and your kingdom and for your people? Otherwise, it's repressed, we internalize it, and we act out. So know that you're embodied. The role of history, context, and cultural socialization. Very, very critical. So if you don't know your history, get onto your history, read, and understand how this all impacts your work right now, the persons that you're with. And understanding that it affects health-seeking behaviors. There are certain people who will not go to certain places because they don't think they'll get help. They don't think people will like them. They don't think people will understand them. There are places where there are no mental health services or medical things. They're like medical health services desert. Where do they go? So someone at your church says, I need some help. You say, go there. And they're like, well, there's nothing there. So what do I do now? So understanding how all of that affects health-seeking behaviors and how that might affect how you do ministry in your own church. Where are you located? How does that affect how you engage those people in your community? Oops, it's not out yet. Any questions? Take a break. Any questions or thoughts before we move 5-minute break and move into our other section? Yes. Mm.
Because that didn't fit sort of the cultural picture of who he was. He was a successful man, living in a nice house, in a good neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. He ended up killing himself because he wouldn't ask for help, and so then nobody knew
Yeah.
what was going on.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just affect minorities.
Mm-hmm.
It also can affect, the majority
Mm-hmm.
as well in different ways.
And yes, great point. And again, back to assumptions. We can't assume anything. That's why we have to keep asking questions. And always, whenever you at church or in ministry or chaplaincy, seeing your clients, is that you're going to learn something new every time if you're open to it. If you're open to listening to it and feeling it.
Find ways that have been helpful. Because sometimes you just are having conversations with someone.
Yeah.
And they need help but won't help because we started this day out talking about what words mean. And so to ask enough questions to discover what does help look like or mean for that person.
Yeah.
And so you may have to reframe it as, do you have a mentor?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Do you have, is there a golfing buddy who, to frame it in those terms so that they can give themselves permission to use a relationship that they may already have
Yeah.
as a beginning point.
Right. I think it's a really good point. I think we have to start considering how to restructure, like even therapy and counseling. To go for some people to go into a room, my family still doesn't understand why I do what I do. But like, why would you go into a room with someone total stranger and tell them about your problems? You know? It doesn't work in our culture, certainly doesn't work in mine, and in other countries. You just don't do that. It's not the, but it works better in a group. Telling stories are ways to facilitate healing, and they're just as effective because you're still processing it through language and engaging and connecting with other people.
I've always been struck by the role of humility. I think that it's paramount in our work, both as ministers, as care providers of different kinds. Because I think speaks to what was just shared a little bit. Both in owning our own potential biases and assumptions and vulnerability to assumptions or biases, both to be conscious of and just unconscious of, as well as to be curious.
Right.
With and of and about the person you're serving and ministering to and caring for. As a co-learner, as learning with them, from them, and deprived of, and being in a position to help them as well.
Thank you. Panelists, you'll hear more from her in about an hour. Chris.
I was going to say one of the things with some cultures, Pablo Antalon, minister and therapist working with Latino community in a lot of countries at the very beginning. In Latin America, we don't trust medical community
Yeah.
for reasons, or we don't have access to it.
Yeah.
We only go if you're local. Only go if you're like,
Yeah.
someone that's very physically, so you never go. And one of the things he talked about as key is vicarious trust. That they can find other people that they can trust,
Yeah.
who then trust the system,
Yeah.
might be able to find new ways that providers don't know they could finally feel safe and feel to seek help, but at least vicarious trust that they
Right.
might never trust going into your room or talking to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
They may trust you to accompany them
Right.
into situations, so that's difficult to do. It's never, we can't impose certain idea of what therapy can look like.
Right. That's a really great point. And so hopefully with more research and engaging and being mindful of all these different layers and factors, I think our counseling hopefully will start looking differently for our communities and making it more helpful and effective for folks. 5-minute stretch break, coffee break, and we'll see you back at 2:20. Okay, if you can grab your seats, please. We're going to get rolling again. Sorry, Chris. All right, now we're on to another very important and critical part of trauma, and that's vicarious traumatization. We talked about it earlier. Many of you, most of you are caregivers in some ways, pastors, counselors, soon-to-be counselors, pastors, therapists, and because since there are 20 million people who are affected by PTSD and that there's 60 to 80% people who've experienced at least one traumatic event, that means people in your churches are coming to you with some type of trauma. And you're going to carry that. Some of it may be more intense than others. For some people, it's been repressed for so long, but then you preach a sermon, and then suddenly they remember everything. I don't know. And that might happen. So it's important to make sure you take care of yourself. Because I've experienced it, many probably have experienced it, being burnt out and saying, you know what, I just want to lay out in Aruba for the rest of my life. I don't want to talk to anyone about trauma ever again. And we don't want to go to that extreme. And for some people, it's actually physically debilitating. They become sick because they've internalized that trauma. So, breakout groups. When have you experienced burnout? What were the signs before the burnout? What prevented you from taking care of yourself? And how did the burnout impact your ministry and practice? Okay, let's take about 10 minutes. Talk about that. Okay, sounds like a lot of interesting discussions. Where's the mic? Okay, can someone pass the mic on that table to that group over there, and then the mic there to this group over here? Thank you. You can choose one of the questions to answer.
I'm sorry, did you say pick one of those?
Yeah, good pick. Yeah, at least pick one. What
Okay.
was riveting for you?
Okay. Well, I shared a story of burning out in church planting. I'm sure nobody can relate to that. But what I was digging in on was what prevented me from taking care of myself. And I was sharing that, a lot of church planners are very driven, entrepreneurial, and they just seem to go through, they thrive on the chaos. And that really wasn't how I was wired. I was more kind of pastoral shepherding kind of person. And I think I felt like my ego said I needed to tough it out. And so I didn't get help when I was struggling. I didn't create a good support system around myself. It was more kind of a pride that says I got to take care of myself. And so, but in the end, I really paid the price for it.
Do you mind sharing, like, is it David?
Yeah.
The signs? What were some of the signs?
I think some of the signs were that where I would be sort of avoiding a lot of the parts of my work I didn't like, whether it was confronting difficult people or other things like that, finding myself sort of escaping to playing video games in my office instead of actually doing the work I was supposed to do. I mean, things like that. I mean, I should have seen,
Right.
It was a sign that I was avoiding some of the things that were really difficult. I was trying to avoid the pain of the struggle.
Sounds like people can relate.
Is it not just me?
All of my students.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Thank you, David. This group here, one of the questions, please.
We heard a lot of different about manifesting physical symptoms of, like illness or chronic illness or repeated illness. Just the feeling like of general exhaustion and kind of this idea of just like kind of having like a mental fog, like I know what I think I want to do, but not being able to verbalize or like take action on things that used to you could get traction on like instantly.
That's a good point. Thank you. Has anyone ever heard of the Duke Clergy Initiative? Have you guys heard of that? It's at Duke, and basically they realize that pastors are the unhealthiest folks on the planet. Not on the planet, but they're pretty unhealthy. And so they got some money to focus on Methodist pastors. There's something, if you Google it or YouTube it, there's actually a little spiel on it. And it's amazing, just issues around weight gain, heart attacks, how all of that ministry, because it's a caregiving profession. I don't know if they're doing that with counselors, but you give and you give and you give and you give and you give. And we only have such a capacity to do that. So, like they say on the plane, before you can give the kid the oxygen mask, put it on yourself. I mean, it's really true as caregivers. If you're not taking care of yourself, I've experienced burnout. It comes that you just don't want to take care of anything. You're just completely like zoned out. And that's the extreme. You just don't want to just forget about ministry. Life is over. You're just like the Elijah thing. You just want to die. Like, you're done. You're just done. Especially if it happens all the time and people are consistently expecting certain things from you. So it seems really selfish, and it is, and selfish is not a bad thing, to really make sure you take care of yourself, or you literally may at times not be able to do anything because you're physically out of it. So, vicarious traumatization. And for all of you who have that article, if you haven't, I'll make sure to get it to you. Students will talk about it more on Friday. But this is how they define it. Transformation of the helper's inner experience resulting from emphatic engagement with the client's trauma material. Okay? So what they're experiencing, the feeling of being overwhelmed, the fragmentation, all of that is now affecting you. Especially if you're consistently engaging those type of individuals in your church, in your ministry, in your counseling practice. So what they're experiencing, because you're so emphatic, you're experiencing. You're becoming more anxious. You're hyper-aroused. You're afraid. And some of the stories are pretty graphic. Again, for some of you, you might be the only person, the first person with whom they're sharing that story of trauma. And that's also a heavy thing to carry. Like, you're the only one I'm telling this to. And then they tell you everything. This is what happened, because they finally feel safe. And now you carry that. And then you possibly have your own trauma. And I think it's just really, really important that we're all in this field for a reason. Whatever field that is, counseling, whatever it is, and to be mindful of that as we engage. So, this is in your article, but I want to focus on a couple of things. These are some signs of it. See if you identify with any, if all of them. The over-identification with the client. That's a big one. These are the couple of ones I want to talk about. The boldness, the ones in bold, where you're totally, like, you lose a sense of yourself and the client. It's like you're totally there. Like, there's no boundary. So you become enmeshed. That's a very dangerous place to be as a pastor, as a chaplain, as a counselor, because everything is blurred. You can't really distinguish what's you and what's the other person. And so it's hard to really make any clear judgments about anything. And so you got to be mindful. And this is where I think some of the sexual stuff and emotional stuff gets really kind of crazy, right in this space, the over-identification, because you're not thinking as a clinician, as a chaplain. You're just so involved and engaged. So you're calling people at midnight, like when office hours are over. You know what I mean? You're meeting people for Starbucks when, wait, we never met there before. Like your boundaries, they're getting low. So that's a sign. No time or energy for oneself. Again, it seems very counterintuitive, but it's when you're feeling overwhelmed, most overwhelmed, you need to get away. You need to take some time for yourself. I had a friend who spent a month in Italy. Maybe we can't all do that, you know? Very nice for her. But maybe a day, a couple of hours, where you're just like, you know what? The phone, I'm turning it off. Again, things that we kind of know, but it's so hard to do when you're in ministry and doing, counseling, because you want to be there. And there's something that we get from that, and we need to be careful of feeling needed and wanted. And we need to check that. Like, what is that really about? Social withdrawal, playing video games, like you just don't want to deal with people. You don't want to see another person or deal with their stuff anymore. That's when you start becoming isolated. And disconnection from loved ones. You're just not connecting with them. You don't want to connect with them because they have their own stuff too. So these are some key things. All these are important, but just be mindful how these can really get you in a place where you can get involved in unhealthy behaviors. And this is where the ethical stuff starts to come in. Usually, if you ask any pastor or chaplain or a clinician who got involved with a client, they were probably feeling one of these. And they look to that person to fill that need instead of getting it elsewhere and taking care of themselves. Very rarely will someone just kind of, I guess you have the situation, but usually they're getting burned out, and there's no way to kind of take care of themselves. Here's some more. Again, it's in your article. Loss of feeling secure, cynicism, like they're never going to get well. Forget it. Just go somewhere else. And changes in identity with worldview, spirituality. So someone's feeling like, you know what, I'm done with this world, there's no hope. You start feeling like there's no hope, and it becomes despairing as well. So again, these are all in the article. But here's a couple things I really want us to for us to be mindful of. That we're wounded healers. Each of us have our own stories. I have my own story, you have your own story. We all have our own stories. And that has called us into this work. She says, these are people who, through their own traumatic experiences, possess the capacity for empathy. So that's the good thing. That's the schema, Trianda, we're talking that something is happening, becoming more empathic. However, their need to heal others helps them avoid contact with their own processed trauma. So in many ways, we've got to check ourselves. What's going on? Continue with your own therapy. Get accountability, spiritual direction, a mentor, whomever, where you are constantly working through your stuff. So you don't bring your stuff to your clients or to your parishioners, which can also impact them in a negative way. So make sure you're not looking to your client, to your parishioner, to not deal with your own stuff. I'm helping so-and-so so much. This is all the stuff that I'm doing, and it keeps you from really engaging in processing what's going on within you. Self-awareness, self-awareness, self-awareness. I can't say how often. She talks a lot about it. It's like, I think in our culture, like we're so afraid. I think that's why some people don't want to go to therapy. Like, oh my gosh, what am I going to know about myself? Well, we're going to find great stuff. We're going to find a lot of not so good stuff. The shadow, the dark sides, the parts of ourselves that we don't want anyone to know, but that's there. Jung asks us, Carl Jung, to own it. That's the only way to engage it. And again, one of my favorite scriptures is like, Paul is like, I don't do what I want to do. What I want to do, I don't do. I mean, I feel like that's the internal struggle with all of us, We're constantly battling it. But to repress it and not to acknowledge it only gets us into more trouble. So spend time just just saying, what's really going on with me? For some of you, it's through your spiritual practice. Prayers of examine. And she talks a little bit about it, not in that way, but really kind of go deep. What is going on with me? And why am I engaging that way? We don't take enough time to really, And it's not in like a sort of like a self-flagellation way, but really just taking a good look. We get our cars tuned up. We do our things to our homes and renovate, but we don't do that same stuff internally. And there are times to kind of clean house, do some spring cleaning and see what's going on inside of us. Prayers of confession, that's a big one. Like, this is what's going on. I really didn't like that client, that's happened to me. What's going on with that? Why do I always feel sleepy when I'm with that client? And I had to ask that. And I found out, there's something going on here. Instead of ignoring it, I just didn't sleep. But no, she was the only client that I always felt sleepy with. Spiritual direction, for some of you, there's, to kind of journey in that way. And therapy, again, even as a therapist, I'm not saying therapy is for everyone. For some people, again, for lots of reasons, they don't want to go to a therapist. But there are other ways to engage. There's small groups. Even I'm a big advocate of like the AA groups. It doesn't have to be AA, but other things where you can just connect with other people and realize that you're not alone in your journey. Trainings are also good. She talks a lot about that too. And get away, for goodness sake, just go somewhere. And even if it's for a day, I love botanical gardens. Go somewhere and just be with yourself and just not deal with, your work. Because especially with our kind of work, we take it with us. And you need to be able to distance away from it. Sabbaths are a big thing. Important to do that. I know, again, it seems like the counterintuitive pick, so you're moaning there. But it's so critical for our health. And retreats. Convents and monasteries are the best kept secret. They're the suggested donation. So you call them on the weekend, and they're most likely to oblige you for a day to do that. So what I want us to do now, this is kind of the homework. First part of it is to be quiet with yourself and do some reflection. How's it going? How's your work going? What's coming up for you? What's been difficult? What are some things that you're still needing to work through? We'll start with that. And so we're going to get 5 minutes. You actually can leave if you want. Just be back by 2:45. Finally, talk again. Each of you are in groups. It sounds like you've been in the same group for a while. To make a pact, at least for the next 7 days, between now and next Monday, what is one thing you're going to do that's life-giving for you? And talk to each other about it. Something about naming it and saying it. What is that one thing? I don't care if it's like sitting at the bench for 20 minutes. It could be as little as that. And not to my phone off, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to rest and just look at the stars or look at the clouds. What is that one thing that you're able to do between now and next week that's life-giving and that will give you some that's not work? Talk amongst yourselves about it. Okay, sounds like some good energy. Good energy. No, we're not going to do that. Thank you. I hope that you heard what your group has talked about and to hold that because at the end of the day, more than important than your work is yourself. That God really cares about us and about our well-being and not just what we do for God. And I think it's just really important to get to the heart of that how are you feeling about yourself? Exercise, eating, walking, breaks, taking retreats are an important part of the journey. It's not just always giving out to people, but giving back to yourself. Jesus did it. So if we want to go back to that, but it's so critical that we for some reason we think that if we're in ministry or in a particularly helping service, that's all that is to our lives. But it's so much bigger than that. And if you're not taking care of yourself, then you're not going to actually take good care of the people that you've been entrusted with. You actually might do them more harm. But most importantly, you are important, and therefore it's important to take care of yourself. Okay, 5-minute break, panel's coming up. Okay.